Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for your participation in the Critical Issues Forum, Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Education Project for high school students. So I would like to introduce this year's student research project. This year's topic is Nuclear Risk Reduction, Crisis Prevention in a Time of International Turbulence. In recent years, the international and regional security environment surrounding nuclear weapons has encountered many challenges and crises. As this year's topic shows, we are in a time of international turbulence in many ways. Last year, there was a very significant development in nuclear disarmament. On July 7th, last year, the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, commonly known as the Ban Treaty, was adopted at the United Nations. For the first time in history, once this treaty enters into force, nuclear weapons will be completely prohibited and become illegal under international law. The adoption of the Ban Treaty was a very positive development, especially for nuclear disarmament advocates. At the same time, opponents of the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty criticize that it completely ignores current international and regional security situations, including increasing nuclear risks. This statement is, of course, arguable. However, it is true that there are currently many serious and imminent nuclear risks, and it is highly important to make efforts to reduce such risks. Hence, every year, we select a very timely topic for the CIF project. It is unfortunate that the world is facing so many nuclear risks, but that is why we believe it is important for us to provide the opportunity for next generation leaders to study these important issues. One of the most notable setbacks in nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament is, as many of the CNS experts mentioned in their lectures for this year's CIF workshop, the deteriorating relation between the United States and Russia. The United States and Russia possess more than 90% of the world nuclear weapons. Over 25 years after the end of the Cold War, there are still almost 15,000 nuclear weapons existing in this world. This fact itself indicates that humanity still lives with nuclear threats. The current situation in the world poses more imminent threats, and most disturbingly, the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons is higher than the time of the Cold War, given the unstable world security situation. The United States and Russia are not talking to preserve existing arms control treaties, and there is a good possibility that there will be no arms control treaty between these two world's largest nuclear possessing countries. This is an extremely dangerous situation. In addition, North Korea's nuclear and missile programs still exist, despite some diplomatic breakthrough between North Korea and the United States. There is no real denuclearization talk yet. Furthermore, the United States' unilateral decision to withdraw from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, so-called Iran nuclear deal, again opened the door for Iran to quickly expand its nuclear development capability. The new nuclear posture review issued by the Trump administration earlier this year includes the development of new types of nuclear weapons, a potential low-yield nuclear weapon, which could be more usable. Instead of taking initiative in nuclear risk reduction, the new US nuclear posture could increase the risk of nuclear use. The risk of the use of nuclear weapons, both intentionally and accidentally, does exist. And any use of nuclear weapons is absolutely devastating to humanity and environment. So we must avoid it. I do not want to list so many negative aspects of nuclear weapons situation, but this is the world we live in right now. The important thing is we should be aware of this situation, and especially for young generations, it is important to study these issues. So I hope young generations, especially CIF participating high school students, will be a solution for this nuclear crisis. As high school students, the first thing you can do is to study nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. This year, you'll tackle the multitude of challenges of nuclear risk reduction, how we can prevent such risks, and how to move forward toward peace and security of a world free of nuclear weapons. Today, I'm going to describe this year's project goals, objectives, and student assignments. I also want to emphasize that it is the teachers who will directly work with students and guide them throughout the project duration. While CNS is providing instructions and study materials, each school has a different situation. Therefore, I hope each school conducts the CIF project in a way that works best for your school. So if you have any questions or concerns while you are working with the students, please do not hesitate to contact me anytime. And if your questions are too difficult for me to answer, I will certainly consult with my colleagues who are content experts. So now I would like to talk about this year's project goals. First, let me start with these overarching project goals. These goals remain the same regardless of the topic every year. So that's why I call this overarching project goals. The first goal is to develop critical thinking skills through project activities. We want students to think critically and to develop analytical skills while learning this year's subject matter. We want students to find their own solutions based on their studies. We also want students to enhance cross-cultural understanding. There are participants from 3 different countries. Obviously, each country has unique background and a very interesting connection with the nuclear weapons. US and Russia are the world's largest nuclear weapons state, and Japan, the only country that has experienced the wartime nuclear devastation. We hope students will learn from each other while respecting different cultures and different opinions. The third overarching goal is to raise awareness of nuclear weapons-related challenges among the participants. Nuclear weapons-related issues are challenging, of course, and complicated. And sometimes many people think such issues are too complicated for high school students to think. But they are wrong. I truly believe that high school students are fully capable to tackle this problem with guidance from teachers. Students can come up with their very unique and creative solutions. And most importantly, I really want them to become interested in these very challenging but vital global security issues. I do not think all of the CIF students will become nuclear experts, but it is important for more and more young generations to become interested in these important issues. This will have a big impact. The fourth goal is to deepen students' knowledge associated with nuclear weapons issues, international peace and security, through the project activities. And the last one is content mastery. Students are going to study challenging issues related to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, particularly this year's topic, nuclear risk reduction, crisis prevention in a time of international turbulence. There are so many things to study in this area. It is natural if you do not understand all of the issues during this short period of time. But I believe that this is a great opportunity for high school students to study this important issue. And I really hope that all of you enjoy the project. So I hope that the students, with their teachers' guidance, will do their best to learn the danger of nuclear weapons and gain a better idea of how challenging it is to work for nuclear risk reduction, non-proliferation, arms control, and disarmament. It is essential to become an awakened citizen to make progress toward the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. We want students to understand the current world nuclear weapons situation. If we want to have the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons, first, we need to understand the current reality and dangerous situation of nuclear weapons status in the world. Okay, so now I would like to talk about the specific goals and outcomes related to this year's topic, nuclear risk reduction, crisis prevention in a time of international turbulence. These are our expectations and hope that students can achieve through the project. I want students to make efforts to understand these issues through the project activities. That is why we included these issues in the lectures. So goals related to this year's topic include: students are expected to understand the current global nuclear weapons situation, the basic science of nuclear weapons, the difference between arms control, non-proliferation, disarmament, and abolition. So you can find these terms in the glossary I included in the useful resources. Students are expected to understand international efforts to prevent nuclear proliferation and reduce the number of nuclear weapons. These efforts include nuclear non-proliferation treaties, nuclear test ban treaty, and negotiations on the nuclear ban treaty. In addition to treaties, it is important to understand the key actors in the international arena. The United Nations has an important role for disarmament. Also, civil society movements for nuclear disarmament played an important role, especially in the adoption of the nuclear ban treaty last year. Of course, national governments have a very important role in nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. Students are also expected to understand the US, Soviet, Russia bilateral efforts to reduce the number of nuclear weapons. The United States and Russia, formerly Soviet Union, are the two world's largest nuclear weapons possessing countries. And only these two countries have bilateral arms control treaties. So these two countries' nuclear weapons-related policy and issues are very important part of this year's project. Students also need to recognize disarmament progress or lack thereof. People have different opinions about the progress of nuclear disarmament. Some people say the rate is too slow and argue that the countries with nuclear weapons are not fulfilling their promises under the Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. By the way, Article 6 contains disarmament obligations. However, the United States and Russia have decreased their weapons from 70,000 during the Cold War to about 15,000. Nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states have very different perspectives toward the rate of disarmament progress. So we need to study these different perspectives. Students are expected to understand the overview of the current nuclear weapons-related risks and challenges, including deteriorating US-Russia relations, US nuclear weapons policy, Iran's nuclear program, North Korea's nuclear weapons program, and potential use of nuclear weapons. As I mentioned earlier, currently there are so many nuclear challenges in this world, and each problem is very complicated, and there is no easy solution. But first, it is important to recognize that there are many serious nuclear crises currently. Students also need to understand the current divided opinions toward nuclear disarmament in multilateral nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament efforts. When we study the different opinions toward the nuclear weapons ban treaty, you will understand the division is very obvious. For this year's project, students are expected to investigate one or two specific issues related to nuclear risks of your choice and deepen your knowledge about these issues. You will examine how such challenges affect global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regimes. I will explain about this in more details later. Then students are expected to examine how the global community can solve the current nuclear crisis. Taking into consideration the current nuclear crisis, develop your vision for pathway to or solution for solving such risks and achieving the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. The Critical Issues Forum will focus this year's project on nuclear risk reduction. So it is important for the next generation of leaders, CIF participants, to develop their own vision of a future, safer world. Okay. So next, in order to realize these goals I just stated, students are going to complete 2 assignments, 1 mini project and 1 final project. The purpose of completion for the mini project is for students to demonstrate that they understand the basics of nuclear issues. The mini project's deadline is going to be in late February. And I will talk about deadlines and important dates related to this year's project at the end of the workshops. So maybe I'm going to do it tomorrow during the wrap-up session. The mini projects will be posted on the CIF website. They will also be reviewed by CNS experts, and each school will receive feedback for further improvement. So students have a chance to revise the project for a better final project outcome. The final project is going to be presented at the spring conference, and the students will be required to submit drafts of the final project before the spring conference. The final projects will also be posted on the CIF website, and most likely, student presentations at the conference will be videotaped. So student projects will be posted along with the video recordings. So to reiterate, students will have 2 deliverables to complete. To help produce these 2 deliverables, students will go through suggested research phases. I'm going to talk more about the research phases in a minute. We have designed the project so that all of the students' research activities will lead to the final project. So this chart is a summary of what I just said. There are 3 research phases, 1, 2, 3, and 2 deliverables, mini project and final project. Roughly speaking, in research phase 1, here, you will work on a fact-finding on the topic, general fact-finding. In research phase 2, you will identify 1 or 2 problems. In the context of this year's topic, those problems are nuclear threats, nuclear risks. So in research phase 2, you will begin to identify specific nuclear risk-related problems. And in research phase 3, here, you will analyze your selected problems and find your own solutions based on your studies. And I will explain objectives and suggested topics of each phase in more details in a minute. But before I go into the details of the project, I want to remind you of the 4 content domains of the CIF project. All the participants will examine this year's topic in CIF's 4 content domains. These are scientific, environmental, social, cultural, economic, and political, geopolitical aspects. The Critical Issues Forum is an interdisciplinary project. Since non-proliferation and disarmament of weapons of mass destruction are complicated and challenging topics for everybody, students need to tackle their project from various perspectives and disciplines. For example, if you understand the scientific aspects of nuclear weapons alone, excuse me, but do not have enough knowledge about policy aspects of nuclear disarmament, you cannot make any persuasive argument on nuclear disarmament. The same thing can be said for the opposite. Therefore, we encourage teachers and students to conduct research and gather information and data from the 4 domains the program is using when it is possible to do so. Now, I would like to briefly talk about citations for student deliverables. These requirements related to citation are important reminders for all of us who conduct any academic research. These are very important points when you conduct academic research. We also included training videos on these requirements, how to cite sources correctly by an English language professor. These training videos are also posted on the CIF Teachers Workshop website. So you have opportunity to learn more about the citation later. Project deliverables must be students' original work. We do not want to see students cutting and paste from websites such as Wikipedia, although I really don't expect we need to see such things. But just in case, when students are going to use materials borrowed from other sources for their projects, these materials must be properly and fully cited based on accepted academic practices. Those materials must be quoted and cited, or paraphrased and cited. Also, if students are going to use photos, graphics, or multimedia, including video clips, charts, and other visual materials borrowed from other places, please make sure that those materials must be available for educational purposes. It is always good to use some public domains. I want to recommend using public sites, including governments and international organization sites. The best way to go include the United Nations website, International Atomic Energy Agency, and Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization photo libraries. So if you want to use photos from news media, such as TV or newspapers, you may need to get their owner's permission. So please be careful. And I will give you one session to introduce useful resources, including international organizations and the research institute later in the workshop, probably tomorrow. So now I would like to talk about research phase 1. In this research phase, students are going to build a basic foundation. In research phase 1, students will complete one mini project. Research phase 1 is fact-finding on the status of the world nuclear weapons. In order to understand the status of nuclear weapons in the world today, students will do the following research activities. Students will study the basic components and the physical impact of nuclear weapons. You do not need to go into too much details, but it is important to understand the basic function of nuclear weapons. So Dr. Ferenc Darenki-Veresh's lectures describe these elements, so refer to useful resources. You will also need to identify who has nuclear weapons and how many there are. You also need to identify nuclear weapon states, including countries who are not members of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and non-nuclear weapon states. By the way, non-nuclear weapon states mean countries who do not have nuclear weapons and are members of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Students will also need to learn about existing nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament treaties, such as Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. These issues are covered by Ms. Sarah Bidger's lectures. So make sure to watch her lectures. She gave 2 lectures. In addition, students will identify recent efforts for nuclear disarmament and associated challenges. particularly the efforts to create the new treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons and the challenges that the treaty is facing, namely the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty. This challenge is connected with divided opinions toward the Nuclear Ban Treaty. Finally, students will identify several nuclear weapons-related crises and challenges in recent years. I have mentioned some of the challenges in this presentation, and we included such lectures addressing nuclear challenges and crises. However, during research phase 1, you do not need to conduct in-depth research of each issue at this stage. The important thing is to understand the overview of such challenges at this stage. So when students submit their mini project, please note the next items. Mini project will be posted on the CIF website. Therefore, the project needs to be visually presentable. Students are encouraged to use some technological tools to enhance their presentation. Having said that, content of the presentation is more important than tools. So if you create a visually very fancy presentation, but there are lots of errors and misunderstandings, you may need to redo your project to correct the erroneous information. If your school decides to write an essay, that is also fine. However, please include some visual aids for your presentations to be posted on the project website. Please include appropriate photos, graphics, and charts that enhance your essay. And please remember to cite sources appropriately. I included some examples from previous years, so I encourage you to take a look at those for your reference. You can go to previous year's website from these links. And these are some example forms for the mini project. Nowadays, students know more presentation tools than I know, so there may be, or they may be, these tools may be already outdated. And a lot of schools use interactive maps to present the world nuclear status, and the PowerPoint presentations are still major forms of presentation of the mini project. And more schools are now using Prezi, the very fancy tool. And again, if you want to write an essay using a Word document, that is also fine, but please include some visual aids. Some schools have created websites and blogs to post students' work. That is also a very creative way to conduct the project. Some schools created a short film to demonstrate students' understanding of the contents of nuclear issues. That is also a nice way to present. You can propose other formats, but I would appreciate if you could just check with me beforehand. So in order to see previous year's students' work, again, please visit our project website and you can see the link. These are recent years' mini projects. Okay. So now, I will talk about research phase 2. So research phase 2 is part of the final project. At this phase, students will select 1 or 2 nuclear weapons-related crises and challenges and conduct in-depth research, identify how those challenges affect the current international, regional, nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regimes. As I mentioned in the research phase 1, it is important for students to understand the overview of such major challenges and crises. And by the end of research phase 1, students will have learned an overview of several major nuclear crises and challenges. However, each challenge is very complicated, so we do not expect that students conduct in-depth research of each of those major challenges. That is going to be a year-long project, so we are not expecting you to do that. Rather, we would like to ask students to select 1 or 2 major nuclear challenges for further investigation. Again, please remember, this phase will be part of the student's final project. So this is not a separate deliverable to be submitted. In this research phase, there are several objectives. These are objectives of research phase 2. Students will understand the current imminent nuclear crisis and challenges to international peace and security. Students will understand how such challenges and crises affect global nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regimes. Students will understand why and how nuclear crises, both internationally and regionally, increased in recent years. Students will deepen their knowledge of some of nuclear crises and challenges they have chosen to further investigate. Students will understand humanitarian impact of the use of nuclear weapons. Students will understand international efforts to abolish nuclear weapons. Students will understand why there are different perspectives in nuclear disarmament. Students will understand challenges inherent in the current nuclear non-proliferation regimes. By the way, students are working on research phase 2. They will have acquired basic knowledge of the world nuclear weapons status and basics of nuclear weapons science. The following points are some suggested research topics in research phase 2. And these are part of a student's final project. Students can choose some of the following topics. Students do not need to, nor should they include all of these in their final project. We do, however, encourage students and teachers to have time to discuss all of these items somehow, if it's possible. And each topic is related to and interconnected with the other topics. So you can also choose to combine some of these topics here. Suggested topics for research in this phase include I think I skipped one slide. Sorry, this is a slide I'm talking. Determine the most imminent nuclear threats posing to international peace and security, and explain why. How should these pressing threats be addressed? Select 1 or 2 specific issues, conduct research on those topics, including background information, current status, why there are serious threats both regionally and globally. Investigate US-Russia relations, arms control treaties from historical perspectives and current deadlock in the bilateral arms control negotiations. Investigate the possible new arms race between the US and Russia and examine what impact it would have on global nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. And what is the potential impact of the US withdrawal from the JCPOA, so-called Iran nuclear deal? How will this impact the Middle East and other global nuclear issues? Continued from the previous slide, the suggested topics for research in this phase include investigate North Korea's nuclear weapons and the missile program and current development. Investigate the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons given the deteriorating relations between the US and Russia. Investigate how other NPT nuclear weapon states, especially China, will be part of the arms race, and what role China can play in global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Investigate what are the major obstacles at the 2020 NPT Review Conference. By the way, Sarah Bidgood lecture comprehensively covered this topic, 2020 NPT Review Conference. And investigate policies toward the ban treaty of nuclear weapons states, non-nuclear weapon states under the nuclear umbrella, and non-nuclear weapon states not relying on the nuclear umbrella. Just to clarify, non-nuclear weapon states under the nuclear umbrella, meaning countries like Japan, South Korea, that are protected by the United States nuclear weapons. And also in Europe, NATO members, such as Germany, Italy, and Turkey, they are also protected by the US nuclear weapons. And the non-nuclear weapon states not relying on the nuclear umbrella, meaning countries like South Africa, Malaysia, Indonesia, those countries called non-aligned movement countries. Basically, they do not have an alliance like the United States and Japan. And the students investigate how, if the nuclear weapons ban treaty and the existing non-proliferation and disarmament treaties, such as Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, and a Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, or CTBT, can complement each other. I think some topics I listed above are similar to the others. So again, you can certainly combine some topics. Also, if you come up with any different research topics in this phase 2, please feel free to pursue those topics. And if you have any questions about these topics, please feel free to contact me. And again, the research phase 2 is part of the student's final project to be presented at the conference. So you do not need to submit a separate paper or presentation for the research phase 2. So research phase 2 is going to be part of the final project. I am repeating this, I just do not want you to misunderstand. This phase is the first half of the final project, which is the final presentation at the conference and provides the background for research phase 3. After selecting 1 or 2 topics for phase 2, you will select relevant research activities we have suggested to help structure your research project. research phase 2 outcomes produced through your activities for the investigation of your selected topics will be presented as part of the final presentation at the student conference. So research phase 2 will be the basis for research phase 3. So research phase 2 will be the basis for the research phase 3. So at this stage, I would also like to know your plan for the final presentation. So when you conduct the research phase 2, you also need to think about your final presentation because research phase 2 is part of your final presentation. Okay, so these are some suggested activities in research phase 2. Since these are suggested, you are not required to conduct all of these activities. These research activities will help you to demonstrate your understanding of the topics and help you to construct your final project. This phase of studies could include, for example, create timeline of US-Russia, Soviet arms control negotiations, treaties, current development, conduct case studies on US and Russian policy toward New START extension or termination, conduct case studies of Iranian nuclear program and negotiations toward the JCPOA, so-called Iran nuclear deal, and the situation after the Trump administration. They conduct case studies of North Korea's nuclear weapons and missile program and recent development. These issues are very nicely covered by Grace Liu's lecture yesterday. And conduct case studies of the US nuclear weapons policy, especially the policy in the new nuclear posture review issued in 2018. They conduct case studies on the possible use of nuclear weapons in a few different scenarios and how to prevent it. They conduct case studies of the humanitarian impact of the use of nuclear weapons because of the current nuclear crisis. Conduct case studies of the overview of the nuclear weapons ban treaty, the current status, including signatures and ratification, and what the biggest challenges in the ban treaty. And conduct case studies of possibility of ban treaty. Opponents and proponents can find some common ground and collaboratively work to reduce nuclear weapons risk. Again, at this stage, students also need to think about the plan for the final presentation in phase 3. So now let me move to the research phase 3. Research phase 3 is to look ahead to the future. In the research phase 3, students will present their own vision, their solution to reduce nuclear risk and eventual nuclear-free world. And these solutions and visions need to be supported by their research they have conducted in phase 1 and 2. So in phase 1, students learned basic facts and the world nuclear weapon status, the basic science of nuclear weapons, existing nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament treaties, and an overview of the current nuclear crisis and challenges. And in phase 2, students have selected 1 or 2 nuclear weapons-related crises and conducted in-depth research. Then, students have identified how those challenges affect the current international, regional nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regimes. And finally, in this phase 3, students are going to come up with their own solution and conclusion based on these studies in phase 1 and phase 2. So these are some suggested topics for research in the phase 3. In this phase, based on your studies you have conducted in phase 1 and 2, you will synthesize, evaluate, and analyze the information you have learned. Then you will select 1 or 2 topics related to your research you have chosen in phase 2 to come up with your vision, your solutions to reduce nuclear risk and eventual nuclear-free world. Again, these are suggested topics. So you do not need to conduct in-depth research on all of these topics. Like the research phase 2, some topics I listed are similar to the others. So again, you can certainly combine some topics. Also, if you come up with any different research topics in this phase 3, please feel free to pursue those topics. But please remember that both research phase 2 and 3 are part of the final presentation. So topic you have selected in research phase 2 needs to be relevant to research phase 3. And these are some suggested topics. So examine whether international community can collaborate to reduce the current imminent nuclear risks, both globally and regionally. Examine how the United States and Russia, as the world's largest nuclear weapon state, can work together for arms control. Analyze how to make progress toward the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula that will lead to regional peace and security. Examine how to preserve the JCPOA, so-called Iran nuclear deal, and how to bring any positive development to the Middle East. Analyze any possible scenario that the United States and Russia can restart arms control consultation to preserve INF, Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and extend the New START Treaty, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and work for global nuclear risk reduction and eventual nuclear disarmament. Identify concrete action plans to make actual progress in reducing nuclear risk and make progress toward a world free of nuclear weapons. Examine how humanitarian approach and the ban treaty can contribute to reduce, mitigate the risk of nuclear weapons and nuclear use. Analyze in this divided world in terms of the approaches to nuclear disarmament, how ban treaty proponents and opponents can find common ground or build bridges to reduce nuclear risk and work together for nuclear disarmament. And examine the role of civil society international organizations, educational institutions to reduce nuclear risk and make progress for a world free of nuclear weapons. With these research topics, students can present their own ideas on vision and pathways for nuclear risk reduction and nuclear disarmament. At the Student Conference, to be held in March in Montreal, each school will make about a 15 to 20 minutes presentation, followed by about a 10-minute question and answer session. These are some example forms of a final presentation. Students are encouraged to use multimedia technology tools. However, again, remember that the content is more important than technology. Also, presenting a video is great, especially if you interviewed your local experts and fellow students who cannot come to the spring conference in Montreal. However, please note that your presentation must be a combination of live presentation and video. So just showing a 20-minute video is not a good idea. The most schools used PowerPoint and Prezi in the past, and some short video clips were included here. Some schools have also done a role play or skits, which was also nice. And again, any new idea is welcome, but just in case, could you please check with me for pre-approval? Students also need to submit an outline of the presentation before the conference. And your presentation outline needs to be approved by me. I just want to check if you are following this year's project instruction and direction. So please see the previous year's presentation in these links. Between now and the spring conference, I will communicate with each school very frequently. Now, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask me anytime. We also want to utilize the CIF project website to conduct a discussion. We often use our Facebook group, and we continue to do so, but there are some people who are not on Facebook, so that's totally fine. So I want to use the CIF website. There is a blog space on the CIF website to conduct online discussions. Also, if necessary, I would like to have some follow-up sessions using whatever appropriate online tools with some schools individually. So I look forward to working with all of you very much. So tomorrow, I will introduce useful resources for this year's topic at the separate session. You will be introduced to a list of comprehensive useful resources that are relevant to this year's topic. The list and a PowerPoint on the useful resources will be also posted on the CIF website. I also wanted to let you know that the CIF is also on social media. So if you are using Facebook, Twitter, please follow CIF account and also CNS account. We also created an Instagram account, although we have not used Instagram very much, but I realized that high school students are using more Instagram than Twitter or Facebook recently. But in terms of the essential communication, I will definitely communicate using email with each teacher. And I want to make sure that each school and all the participating students can really enjoy the CIF project. Although the topics are very heavy, especially this year, I agree it's very heavy, and we are studying very serious issues. But it is so encouraging that high school students are studying these important, challenging issues. And there are very dedicated teachers. So again, I would like to thank you so much for your dedication. As I emphasized many times, the role of teachers is very important for this project. And I really appreciate all of your support and cooperation for the Critical Issues Forum project. So I'm sure that you are watching a recorded version, but if you have any question regarding this year's project instruction, the student assignment, please contact me anytime and I will try to respond to as soon as possible. So I would like to finish this session. So I will see you tomorrow with the useful resources and wrap-up session where I'm going to talk about some timeline and important dates. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for watching.